Let's jump into this 3-round 2025 NFL mock draft. With the first overall pick, we have the Tennessee Titans on the clock. There's a lot of chatter as to whether or not the Titans will actually use this selection on a quarterback. In this mock draft, I will. And I'm going to take my quarterback one. Guy's been my quarterback one for really the balance of the 2024 season and throughout the pre-draft process to this point. That's Cam Ward out of Miami. I think in terms of arm talent, leadership, Cam Ward checks all the boxes. You know, the transition from Wazoo to Miami. Of course, you can go back as far as Incarnate Word. He's developed so much. And really what was really impressive to me was the mastery of the offense, right? The leadership that he demonstrated. I always knew he could spin it, right? I knew he could make plays. There are times where he can get a little bit, he's a bit of a gunslinger. He can get a little careless with the football, sloppy with his mechanics from time to time. But when Cam Ward's dialed in, I think he's the cream of the crop in terms of the quarterbacks in this class. All right, with the second overall pick, we have the Cleveland Browns on the clock, and this is also a quarterback-needy team, although I'm going to go in a different direction here. I don't think Cleveland is a good situation for a young quarterback. I think they have some roster upheaval that they need to mitigate over the course of the next couple of seasons. However, I don't want to leave this draft without one of either Abdul Carter. Obviously, we have the specter of Myles Garrett requesting a trade, and then Travis Hunt, who I think is a very special player, right? People feel that Travis might be a jack of all trades, master of none. I think if you allow him to actually focus on one position in particular predominantly, I think he'll be fantastic. I think he'll be fantastic, whether or not he's a corner or a receiver. With that being said, I do plan on trading down here. I'm going to trade down, but I'm not going to trade down too far. In fact, I'm only going to trade down one spot here with the New York Giants. I think the Giants, again, another team, quarterback needy. In my mind, there's two quarterbacks worthy of first-round selection. You might have them a little lower on the board as far as where you'd feel comfortable taking them first round. But I think when you talk about the quarterback position, you go get your guy at the end of the day, right? And as I mentioned with the Tennessee Titans, I think the Giants certainly need to get that signal caller in place. All right, so we're going to consummate this trade between the Cleveland Browns and the New York Giants here. Because again, we don't want to miss out on both Carter and Travis Hunter. We want one of those two players. I'm sure there's some other teams that would offer more in a trade with Cleveland, but to remain in position to get one of those guys, we're just going to drop down one spot. Giants ensure that they position themselves to get quarterback. All right, so we're going to do a pick swap here in terms of the third round selections, and then we'll add a sweetener, a fourth round in 2026 to consummate this trade. All right. And again, I think when you consider it through the lens of, okay, we're only dropping down one spot, so why give up so much? It's to keep the other teams at bay. There are several quarterback needy teams, the Raiders and the Jets are certainly in that conversation. You could be somebody who feels strongly about Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter trying to move up in order to maintain that option, that flexibility of being able to come away with a Hunter or a Carter. We take a little bit less, but we still make the Giants pay up for it here to some degree. By trading up, DK's Giants get Shedeur Sanders. I think the criticism has jumped the shark a little bit with Shedeur. I think the Giants are just a player or two away along the offensive line to really solidifying that thing. They've made some good strides. If we can keep Shedeur clean, I think Shedeur can be very effective. I think he can be surgical at times, and I really appreciate his toughness. He got beat up a couple seasons ago in Colorado and just kept coming. Just kept coming. You know, obviously defensively they weren't very good. They got better this past year, and you could see it. You could see it overall that the team played better. But Shedeur's toughness, his leadership ability, and again, his competitiveness, not unlike Cam Ward, is the reason why I'm going to take him second overall here to the Giants. Okay, and as I mentioned, we now have that opportunity here, even with the trade down, garnering some additional draft capital on day 2 of the draft here, which I think is very significant. We still leave ourselves in position to take either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. However you stack them up, these might be the top 2 prospects in the 2025 NFL draft class. I'm going to go with Abdul Carter, right? Again, Myles Garrett has made it clear that he wants to move on. He wants to play for a team that is more competitive. I think at this juncture in his career, this is maybe the best time to get the most value for him. And you're not a Myles Garrett away, unfortunately. That's the reality, and that's part of the reason why I did not select a quarterback here. I don't think you're one player away here. There's a lot of work to be done here in Cleveland, so we're going to get it started with Abdul Carter. Okay, that takes us to the New England Patriots, 4th overall, and this is another team I think should be in the market for a trade down. So I certainly would not bat an eyelash if they stayed put and selected Travis Hunter. I think what he could do in combination with Christian Gonzalez on the back end could be really impressive. And then moonlight a little bit as a receiver, particularly in the red zone, give that offense a little bit more teeth. But I think in this particular instance, I'm going to trade down. I'm going to trade down. I want to get a guy who is going to help my young quarterback full time, like whether it be solidifying the offensive line, the protection up front, or perhaps getting a receiver that's going to be full time. And I think, in my opinion, as it relates to Hunter, while I think he'd be a phenomenal NFL receiver in a full time capacity, I think it's just harder to find guys to play cornerback. I think it's just a tougher, taller order to find quality defensive backs in a passing league. So that's where I want him to spend the majority of his time. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I'd like to use him in spot situations, particularly in the red zone, because of his ball tracking, ball skills, the body control that he possesses. So let's trade down. And my trade partner is going to be the Raiders, who I think could certainly use that dual skill set that Travis Hunter possesses. Here's what we're doing in terms of the trade down with the New England Patriots. We're going to give the 4th and the 77. That's a third round selection for the 6th and the 68. So a third round pick swap. We're going to drop down 2 spots. We're also going to add Michael Mayer to the mix. I think if you could pluck Michael Mayer away from the Raiders, obviously with Brock Bowers now as the focal point of that passing attack, I really think this would be a worthwhile trade. You drop down just a couple of spots, garner some draft positioning on day 2, but you also add a player in Michael Mayer that could be your long-term answer at tight end. So we'll make this trade here. All right. So as I mentioned, Travis Hunter is the selection. And again, I think that dual skill set ability will play well. While I want him to play the lion's share of the snaps on the defensive side of the ball, because again, it is that much more difficult to find guys who can hold up at the cornerback position. I just think he's just too talented to completely say, "Hey, you're only playing one position." Right? It's going to be on a limited basis, but I think there's a role, particularly in the red zone, to really leverage Travis Hunter's skill set on offense. Right, little 2 birds with 1 stone there for the Las Vegas Raiders. That takes us to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Duval on the clock. And I'm going to keep it simple. This was a really poor team overall, but the defense in particular was disappointing, right? Trevor Lawrence's struggles, well documented. We're thinking with Liam Cohen, perhaps he'll take a step in the right direction, kind of, regain some of the confidence that I think he lost over the course of the 2024 season prior to the injury. But Mason Graham up front, really, you combine him with Walker, uh, Josh Allen. I think they can be a really formidable group and be a position of strength. The Jaguars really struggled defensively last year, and while they have good individual players, they didn't really gel together. There were just too many breakdowns. I think with Mason Graham in place, that really pulls the front together, and they're going to be a problem. They're going to be a problem if they can stay healthy. So Mason Graham is a selection. Made the trade with the New England Patriots and the Las Vegas Raiders. The Patriots dropping down from the 4th overall pick to the 6th overall pick with the thought in mind that we're going to go get us a number 1 wideout. Ted McMillan is the top receiver in this class as far as I'm concerned. Again, Travis Hunter could compete for that, I think, if he played receiver full time. But I'll continue to reiterate it. What he does at the cornerback position and the difficulty of finding guys who can match up with the likes of a Ted McMillan is the reason why I prioritized him as a corner. McMillan to New England is all about Drake May. The theme throughout this 3-round mock draft, 2025 NFL mock draft for the New England Patriots will be about doing what's best for Drake May. I know with a new coach, you're thinking inside out, and we'll get to it. We'll definitely get to the offensive line, but this prospect at the wideout position, I think, is just a little too good to pass up here, 6 overall. The Jets are a team also in transition. New head coach there with Aaron Glenn. Focus on what Aaron Glenn knows best, right? As far as playing defensive back, cornerback with a clean bill of health. And we're going to find out more with respect to how Will Johnson's rehab is going. What the expectation, will he be ready for training camp? Is that the expectation? That may change. If that injury is taking a little bit longer to heal, you might go in a little bit of a different direction. Of course, it's well documented how much the Jets offense struggled last year, but I thought the defense took a significant step back. And on top of that, there's a lot of roster attrition here. So I'm going to go with the really talented corner here out of Michigan, Will Johnson. Again, just kind of fashioning this thing in the image of Aaron Glenn, longtime cornerback for the Jets. Really excellent player in his own right. He's turned into a terrific coach as well. All right, that takes us to the Carolina Panthers. And I'm going to go against the grain a little bit here as it relates to PFF's ranking. So, PFF is not particularly high on one Jalen Walker. Here at Couch Potato General Manager, particularly CPGM Headley, we've been very high on Walker going back to summer scouting, the summer of 2024. And his flexibility in terms of being an off ball linebacker, but also being very effective in terms of rushing the passer is, to me, perfect for this Panthers defense. It's an odd man front. You have needs at every level of your defense. You had a historically bad defense. To get a player that offers that much versatility and effectiveness is the reason why I'm going to go the Jalen Walker route. And it looks like there was an update. Since the last time I looked at PFF's mock draft simulator, there was an update. I think Walker was in the 60 near, late 50, 60 range. He's up to 32. And I think he'll continue to climb the board and work his way into the top half of the first round, first 20 picks or so. So Jalen Walker to the Panthers to really start getting this defense outfitted with the talent it needs. Okay, just a couple more picks here in the top 10. We got the New Orleans Saints on the clock, and the Saints literally have needs at every position group, including quarterback. Despite the fact that they have Spencer Rattler and Derek Carr under contract, Carr is not the answer. Unfortunately, his contract's an albatross, so you're going to have to play that out a little longer. Rattler could potentially be the guy. He's talented, but he has some rough edges. So this has to be a matter of, okay, we have we have an aging roster, we have an awful cap situation. We just need to start checking some boxes, crossing a few position groups off the list here. And I believe the most important position group is the offensive line. And by adding a Will Campbell here, we can slot him in at left tackle, move Fuaga back to his natural right tackle position. And now you have two young bookends at offensive tackle, building blocks as you rebuild this New Orleans Saints roster. That takes us to the 10th overall selection here with the Chicago Bears. And I'm of the mind, I've already done a couple of trade downs here within the top 10. Let's make it three. Let's make it three here. Chicago really needs to solidify the offensive line. In fact, I think on both sides of the line of scrimmage, they have some work to do, but the offensive line it really struggled last year. Caleb Williams is certainly culpable to a certain extent, but this has been an area that they've needed to get right for quite some time now. And they've just struggled to get it done. They need to get it done now. That being said, I think there's an opportunity here since you're kind of working inside out with respect to what they really need to focus on along the offensive line. The interior is really the area that they need to get solidified more so than anything else. I think you can trade down here. I think you can add some draft capital. So the team that I'm targeting a trade down here with is the Miami Dolphins, who also need to address the offensive line. But I think in the case of the Dolphins, they just need to get more physical. Either side of the line of scrimmage, they need to get more physical. And there's a player in mind that I think would be a good selection either in Chicago or Miami. But Miami's going to get aggressive here. All right. In order to make this trade happen, we're going to part with the 10th overall pick here in Chicago. We'll net the 13th overall pick, the 98th overall pick, which is a late third round, a compensatory pick, and the 5th round selection in 2026. So a little eye to the future here, add some draft capital, Chicago, and then, of course, Miami trades up and gets the player that I covet for them. Okay. Last year, Christian Wilkins left via free agency. They've lost some offensive linemen up front. We can go in either direction, but I think Walter Nolan is just a guy that I think most of us are high on. Pass rush upside is really what separates him among a very deep class of interior defensive linemen, right? His ability to play, anywhere from 2Y out to the 5 technique really is impressive. But I think what he's capable of doing as a 3 technique is really the reason why I'm ultimately going to select him here. Miami has to be more physical. They have to be able to affect the passer. They got to be able to play January football. That's the reality here. So Walter Nolan, I think, helps a long way towards that end. Up next, we have the San Francisco 49ers. And of course, Trent Williams has been a mainstay at left tackle, the best left tackle in the league for an extended period of his NFL career. Longer in the tooth, dealt with some injuries. We're kind of concerned about whether or not, the 49ers Super Bowl window has come to a close. They need to get younger. They definitely need to get younger. I like Josh Simmons. I like Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. Obviously, he dealt with an injury this year, but I think had he played the balance of the season, we're talking about it. I think there's a debate in terms of who the top tackle is in this class. It's either Will Campbell or Josh Simmons, kind of pick your flavor. They have a similar skill set. their ability to move in particular, especially with this outside zone that they like to run here in San Francisco. You can put Simmons at right tackle year one, and ultimately when Trent Williams decides to call it quits, you slide him into left tackle, and that's a foundational piece for you there on the blind side of a right-handed quarterback, i.e. Brock Purdy. So Josh Simmons is the selection here. That takes us to the 12th overall pick, and the Dallas Cowboys are on the clock. Even with Dak Prescott under center, it just seemed like they just did not have enough explosiveness, not enough playmakers around. Receiver certainly is a need opposite CD Lamb, but the backfield is bare. The cupboard is bare in the backfield. I like Ashton Genty, man. I know he's a popular pick to the Dallas Cowboys, and for good reason. And for good reason. I think what we did not really get to see in the 2024 NCAA season was what he does out of the backfield as a receiver. You think back to 2023, he actually was on the Blitnikoff watch list, which is for best receiver in college football. So Genty has a full skill set in terms of the running back position. We already know what he can do as a ball carrier, but I think he can also help in the passing game. And again, Dallas needs guys who can actually put the ball in the end zone, and Genty is certainly capable of that. We got the Chicago Bears on the clock, 13th overall here, and I like a player that I think the consensus is a little split on. I do think the consensus is a little split on whether or not he's a top half of the first round guy versus a late first round prospect, and that's Kelvin Banks Jr. That's Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas. The question at tackle is whether or not he possesses the movement skills to really deal with a wide nine technique, or guys lining up at the 7 dealing with speed on the outside. You don't see him do a vertical set very often, get that depth, get to his landmark. There's a lot of jump sets. So the question or the thought maybe he might be better suited for the guard position. I think the way he moves at the second level suggests he has the requisite athleticism. It's just a matter of refining his actual technique. So I'm going to start him at guard here in Chicago. Braxton Jones, the incumbent at left tackle in Chicago, is going into the last year of his deal. So we could very well see him moving on in 2026. At that point, I move Kelvin Banks out to the outside, but I think he'll be just fine at guard here year one. Kelvin Banks to the Bears. Got the Colts on the clock, and a popular selection, if he's available in most mock drafts, is Tyler Warren. It's certainly a need at tight end, but I love Malachi Starks, man. I love Malachi Starks. I think Malachi Starks is a top 10 prospect in the class. Of course, many will depress his value because he plays the safety position, but just think of Malachi Starks in the same light you think of a Brian Branch, of what you think about a healthy Jalen Petrie, a Kyle Hamilton, in terms of the sheer flexibility he offers your defense, right? We're not just talking about a guy who plays center field in the deep third, right, as a single high safety. You know what I mean? We're talking about who can come up and tackle, be a force edge defender, can play the nickel, can match up against slot receivers, tight ends, does it all. Indispensable to defenses. And the nickel is a starting position in today's NFL. And Malachi Starks can play that role as well. When you don't have Brian Branch healthy in Detroit secondary, they look like a completely different unit, right? Kyle Hamilton, just being able to move him around solved a lot of the issues that they were having on the back end there in Baltimore. Malachi Starks can have that kind of impact in my mind for Indy. Okay. Headley's Falcons on the clock. We're in desperate need of pass rush, and I think Mike Green fits the bill. My only question mark for Mike Green was that would he play the run with the same tenacity and physicality he gets after the pass? Because he's explosive, uses his hands well, good leverage. He has the speed, the power that you want to check that particular box. He has that in spades. I did not see a great deal of that tenacity in the run game on film, but when I had an opportunity to see him live in Mobile, he checked that box for me. So Mike Green, 15th overall to the Falcons. And then Dana's Cardinals here. I think this is a good spot to trade down, right? I think either side of the line of scrimmage is warranted. Receiver, you could add another player to that group. The front seven, really, on the defensive side of the ball needs a little work and needs a little facelift. But I'm going to trade down here. I like the bevy of players that's on the board. I think the Broncos would be wise. It'd be a shrewd move of them to move up here and acquire a Tyler Warren, right? Just a couple pieces away, seemingly, on the offensive side of the ball. The running back position and tight end position stand out to me as fairly significant needs for the Broncos. You think about Tyler Warren's skill set and the versatility that he possesses. I think Sean Payton has a long history of deploying and utilizing those types of players very effectively in a myriad of ways. I think Tyler Warren could be a perfect fit here in Denver. So we're going to make this trade happen It's going to cost the 84th selection there in the third round. We'll send back a sixth next year. No sixth round pick currently for the Broncos in 2026. So we'll send back that six to consummate this trade. All right. And as I mentioned, Tyler Warren is a selection here, which takes us to the Cincinnati Bengals, Al Paul's Bengals. It's seemingly the same story every year, right? And this is another team where you have some expiring contracts, some players getting older, some guys not necessarily playing up to snuff. But priority number one to me is protecting Joe Burrow. Despite the gaudy passing stats and TD totals, still got to do a better job of keeping him upright. And it starts with the interior of the offensive line. Give me Tyler Booker out of Alabama, plug and play. And really solidify that interior of the offensive line, because the pass rush up the middle is what affects quarterbacks most. We get so fascinated and enthralled with the guys who can bend the edge and are screaming off the edge, but interior pass rush completely destroys everything on the offensive side of the ball. And the Bengals have had a glaring issue among their interior offensive line for quite some time. Booker solidifies that. Much to the chagrin of our resident Seattle Seahawks fan, Mr. C. Prasky. I know he really likes Tyler Booker quite a bit. But I'm going to pivot. I'm going to pivot to the defensive side of the ball, the second level of the defense, get back to it being a position group of strength, a la the Bobby Wagner, KJ Hill days. Ernest Jones, that they acquired, via trade midseason, obviously played well, but he's an unrestricted free agent. I'm hearing perhaps that he might re-up with Seattle. If he does, great, right? We can go in a different direction here. If not, I like Jahad Campbell. I like Jahad Campbell's three-down skill set. And again, some folks might feel like, you can always get off-ball linebackers a little bit later. You can point to Tyrese Knight, who actually played well as he got more and more opportunities later in the season for Seattle. He needs a running mate, and Campbell is just a cut above everybody else as far as his ability to get after the passer, play sideline to sideline, and then, of course, what he does in coverage. So well worth a first-round selection in my mind. And you got to think about it. Off-ball linebackers generally lead your team in tackles, right? They are involved in most defensive plays. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to pass up on a guy this talented at such a critical position. Okay. So once again, I think the player that the subsequent team, the next team slated to pick, coveted, is off the board, with Booker going to the Bengals ahead of Seattle, and of course Campbell going to Seattle ahead of the Bucs. So for Drew's Bucs, I'm going to trade down. I'm going to trade out of this spot. I'm going to pivot, but I'm also going to address that linebacking position. I really wanted Jahad Campbell for the Bucs, but it made a little too much sense for me for Seattle. So let's call the Houston Texans. I think the Houston Texans want to ensure they get their guy, and their guy comes in the form of Emeka Egbuka. And as it relates to Emeka Egbuka, obviously he's played with CJ Stroud. Stephon Diggs, not the same player that he was a couple seasons ago, obviously, longer in the tooth, dealing with some injuries. Tank Dell had a very serious injury. It's going to take him quite some time on the road of recovery. You need someone to complement Nico Collins. And I can't think of a better receiver to do that in this class than Emeka Egbuka. Really. I think he's a professional receiver in terms of his nuance, his understanding, his spacing. He slots in as the Z. Nico Collins is a legitimate X. I think they will work very well off one another. And Emeka Egbuka is the type of player that I think gets this team been to the playoffs in back-to-back seasons, get them to the next level, get them to potentially making a deeper run here. I think Egbuka certainly can help you in that regard. So the Bucs will get the 25th pick, as well as Christian Harris. I mentioned the Bucs need to address the second level of their defense. Levante David, it's finally coming to an end. Christian Harris has good film, right? But the Texans also have Azeez Al-Shahir and Henry To'oTo'o. Those are your incumbents, really, right now. Harris can come in, last year of his deal, kind of a prove-it type of situation, make some plays, sideline to sideline for the Bucs, get after the passer when you allow him to green dog and blitz. That kind of fills that void. One less thing to be concerned about here, and you just drop down 6 spots to make that happen. All right, and as I mentioned, the Texans now position themselves getting ahead of the likes of Arizona potentially, or certainly the Pittsburgh, who's receiver needy, even the Chargers, Green Bay for that matter. You want to get in front of those teams here to get the receiver that you covet in Emeka Egbuka. All right, Dana's Cardinals are going to make this pick this time around, and as I mentioned, want to address the down line, that front seven. I think Kenneth Grant's ceiling is immense. Excellent film. Pad level is going to be the key, but when you talk about upsides, it's hard to argue that there's anybody with a larger upside among defensive prospects in the 2025 NFL draft. And when you talk about upside and just kind of the raw size power that he possesses, now you get some NFL coaching, drop him into it's all football at this point for him. I think we can unlock even another level of ability here. There was conversations about whether or not was he the superior prospect to Mason Graham at one point. And like I said, I think this is a great landing spot here for Kenneth Grant in Arizona. Much needed for the Cardinals. Pittsburgh's an interesting team. I mentioned Emeka Ibuka and just kind of his professionalism already, right? He hasn't played a snap yet, but you just see the polish in his game. He's where he's supposed to be. He understands his responsibility is in the offense. He can play multiple receiver positions. Right now, I think you're lacking some of that professionalism, that play like a pro in the Steelers wide receiver room, right? George Pickens is immensely talented, but the temperament just is volatile. There's no other way to put it. In this particular instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the dice a little bit. I'm going to roll the dice a little bit. I'm going to trade down and I'm going to bet on a veteran. He's dealt with some injuries, maybe not quite the same player, but that savvy, that leadership, that ability, I think is what you want in this room. You want to remain in the first round, obviously. We're going to drop down 5 spots because the Rams have someone that they covet that they want to make sure that they get on the roster. I'm gonna add Cooper Kupp, man. I'm gonna add Cooper Kupp. I really do think he brings some legitimacy, some professionalism to this receiver room, guy that you can actually depend on to be where he's supposed to be and make the play. So let's make that trade here. And in doing so, the Rams acquire the 21st overall pick, and I'm gonna snag Armand Membo out of Missouri. I think he's tailor-made for the zone scheme that the Rams deploy or employ at times. Rob Havenstein, longtime right tackle. Eventually, things come to an end. Membo is the perfect replacement. I think he can play guard too. I think he'd be just fine there if you like him more as a guard. But right tackle is his home here in Los Angeles, ultimately. Chargers on the clock. And again, lots of quality football players who go in a number of different directions. This team is aging in terms of edge rusher. They're aging. Khalil Mack, I don't anticipate he'll be back. Joey Bosa may not be back. Certainly has dealt with injuries. He just hasn't been available, to be perfectly frank. And those cap numbers are getting big. They're getting real big. They're getting real, gaudy, right? We want to get guys who are actually going to be on the field. All right. We definitely want to get younger here at the edge. And while I think this particular player I have in mind for Los Angeles may not have the highest upside among the edges on the board, to me, he's just you know what he is. You know what he is. He's going to give you the same dogged effort against the run. He actually has the corresponding production in terms of getting after the passer. I just think this is a very solid selection. And I think that may have a negative connotation when you're talking about first round picks, but I disagree. I disagree. I want guys who are going to show up week in and week out, be productive, do their jobs at a high level. And I feel among these edge prospects, the guy I feel most confident in doing so is Nick Scorton here out of Texas A&M. I said all that, even though I said all that with respect to the Chargers, I'm actually going to get a little bit more risky here with Green Bay and really bet on some upside here. I'm going to go back to the edge group, and I'm going to go with his teammate, Shamar Stewart. Stewart, obviously, kind of some paltry production numbers as far as sacks are concerned over the course of his career. Ballyhooed prospect, not unlike Rashawn Gary, who didn't have a ton of production at Michigan, developed into one of the better edge rushers in the league. I think I'm thinking perhaps we can go along those same lines. I've maintained throughout the season as well as the pre-draft process that Shamar Stewart's best football is still ahead of him. We had a chance to talk to him in Mobile, and he echoed that sentiment that I'm just scratching the surface, right? And I think seeing him get professional coaching, you could see the light bulb just getting brighter and brighter as it came on. It got brighter and brighter. And I mean, the talent is immense. The talent is immense. Green Bay has a proven track record of kind of unlocking some of these types of guys who have all of the physical tools and the measurables. Perhaps it hasn't necessarily translated consistently on the field. I think Green Bay can get the most out of Shamar Stewart, and he fits the bill, bookending him here with Rashawn Gary. Okay, we got the Vikings on the clock, but we have the Kansas City Chiefs making a call. Okay, the Chiefs got beat up there in the Super Bowl. Their offensive line got overwhelmed. I think Joe Tooney, you obviously want to move him back into the interior. He acquitted himself well. He battled throughout the season. Once they lost their starting left tackle or were trying to figure it out at left tackle, He filled in admirably, but it's time to get the long term answer at the left tackle position. Kingsley, their second round pick out of BYU last year. I won't rule him out completely, but I have a sneaking suspicion that he's going to end up at guard. Smith is going to be out, so I want to add a tackle to the mix, and I think Josh Connolly, who has some question marks, I will acknowledge the fact that there's some question marks in terms of his functional strength. That's why I'm a bit lower on him, but the movement ability is truly incredible, right? As much as I like Membo in space, I think Connolly's footwork and fleet of footness is really impressive. His ability to get reach, cut off, get to the second level, tertiary level. Andy Reid likes his screen game. He likes to move guys around misdirection. I think Connolly, assuming he continues to build that functional strength, can be a really good player here in Kansas City. So we'll make that trade. And I think this benefits Minnesota as well. They don't have a second round selection. I think an early third round selection would kind of offset that a little bit by dropping down 7 spots here. So, okay. So we'll grab Connerly for KC. And that takes us back to Drew's Bucks. They've had some roster attrition at the cornerback position. They've struggled to stay healthy at times. They need a guy. They absolutely need a guy. There's 2 prospects that I have in mind at corner for this Buccaneers team. That's Jahdae Barron and Benjamin Morrison, who's I think the injury certainly out of sight, out of mind has hurt him a little bit in this pre-draft process. But you talk about man-to-man coverage skills, it's top in the class when healthy. Barron had a phenomenal season. I'm not sure that anybody had a better season, 2024 campaign among the cornerbacks than Barron. And I actually reached out to Drew on this one. I actually reached out to Drew. Drew being a Bucks fan, I thought have him kind of split the tie for me. And he said Barron. He says he likes the fact that Barron gets his hands on the ball more frequently, turn the football over, get the ball back to what was a very explosive offense here in Tampa Bay last season. So Jahdae Barron is the pick. All right, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers on the clock, and after the trade down that ultimately netted Cooper Kupp, we can go in a little bit different direction. I just spoke about him, Benjamin Morrison, perhaps the best man-to-man corner in this class. He and Joey Porter could form a really formidable duo there at corner in Pittsburgh. So I'll grab the cornerback here out of Notre Dame for Pittsburgh. Baltimore, I think they may be 2 pieces away on the offensive side of the ball. You could prioritize edge rush here, secondary, but a player that there seems to be some polarity among draft analysts and draft enthusiasts as it relates to one particular receiver, Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. I think Trey Harris is a late first round pick in this particular class. And I think he's really the missing piece to that passing game. The passing game was very effective. I don't want to lose sight of that. But I think Harris and the size he possessed outside the numbers, being a true X, could really unlock yet another level to the explosiveness of this offense. You could prioritize edge rush, corner, even the tackle position. But I like Trey Harris to be kind of the final piece as far as that receiving room is concerned, which takes us to the Detroit Lions. And of course, the Lions, they suffered as many injuries on the defensive side of the ball as any team did this season. And it just was too much. They lost Aiden Hutchinson early in the season, didn't derail their season, but certainly we knew that was going to be a hard injury to overcome. But it just kept on piling on. They need to replenish. They need to replenish that down line, right? They need more teeth opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And a guy I like, I think has a lot of upside, still has some room to grow as a pass rusher. May not be the pass rusher that Aiden Hutchinson ultimately is. I'm not expecting him to be an annual double-digit sack guy, but what he does in terms of setting a physical edge, the way he can use his arms, his length, as he reduces down in obvious passing situations. I really like Mykel Williams. He fits the mold, the physicality, the toughness that you want out of this Dan Campbell-led Detroit Lion team. I think he'd be a nice selection, all things considered, here to Detroit. And I've talked about previously Mykel Williams and Shamar Stewart, guys that we're just waiting. We want to see more production out of them as far as pass rushers. If you could combine Stewart's explosiveness and Mykel Williams' hand usage, we're talking about a top 10 guy. We're absolutely talking about a top 10 guy. And in fact, going into the 2024 season, Mykel was a pretty popular first or second overall pick in a lot of early mock drafts. So we didn't really get to see him unlock that part of his game, but I think some professional coaching certainly will help. The Commanders are on the clock here, and I think the Commanders are a player away. I think they're a player or two away here. I do not believe this was a flash in the pan. Of course, they're not going to sneak up on everybody. It's hard to stay healthy. It's hard to repeat, the kind of success that they experience here, making it to the NFC Championship in Jaden Daniels' first year as a rookie here, rookie starter. But I think they have staying power. And if you want to push your chips to the middle of the table, I think the Commanders need to call the Cleveland Browns and make a deal, cut a deal for Myles Garrett. I think the Commanders are the right team. And frankly, considering Myles Garrett's production still, despite the fact that he's going into his age 30 season here, he's still producing at a fairly high level. And the $20 million cap number is actually digestible in this particular climate, especially with the salary cap going up. So I'm absolutely for it. If you could manage to get Myles Garrett for the 29th overall pick and perhaps the third next year, I would not hesitate. It may take a little bit more, frankly, but in this case, I'm weighing his age. I'm weighing a couple of different things here to consummate this particular trade. But I think this is a move that the Commanders absolutely have to explore. I think there's no reason for them not to kick the tires on this one. All right. So instead of selecting 29th overall, the Commanders get Myles Garrett. The Browns are back in the first round, so this will be their second first round selection. And I'm looking at when I look at the Browns roster and I look at what the Browns did well when they seemingly had kind of an upward trajectory, made a playoff run there with Baker Mayfield before the bottom fell out. Was their offensive line and the interior of the offensive line? Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller. They had a really good group. Those guys are getting older. They've dealt with injuries. They're in the last year of their respective contracts. I think a guy like Gray Zabel would fit in really nicely. If you decide to move off of one of those two players this offseason, the position flexibility that he gives you, you could play center if you need to be, really play all five positions. But I think he'd be a phenomenal guard here for Cleveland and really solidify parts of that offensive line. They've just struggled. They've struggled to field a healthy, consistent five up front. Bring in Gray Zabel to really start putting those building blocks together. Okay. Takes us to the Buffalo Bills. And, I've maintained that the Buffalo Bills need to pour some additional resources into their defense. I do believe that. I believe, and Josh Allen has demonstrated that he has the ability to raise the level of players around him. But I'm going to take advantage. I'm going to take advantage of the depth we have along the defensive line, particularly in terms of the interior of the defensive line, and go in a different direction. I'm going to go against what I did last year, even though there's some players that really surprised, maybe played above their heads a bit this past season on the defensive side of the ball. I'm gonna go get Matthew Golden. I'm gonna get Matthew Golden. I think Matthew Golden has receiver one upside. I think he's a good fit here in Buffalo. I think that's what they're missing in this receiver room. I love what Khalil Shakir has done. Keon Coleman, I think, will continue to develop. He's obviously an intriguing prospect in his own right. They brought in Amari Cooper for a reason. It just did not come together fully. They had to fall back on Curtis Samuel, who has had an up and down career, has struggled with injuries in his own right. I think Matthew Golden is probably the last piece to the receiving room here in Buffalo. Okay, so we traded down earlier. The Vikings now picking at 31st overall, and they have some fairly glaring needs along the down line. I love Derek Harmon's film out of Oregon. I think he's another one of these interior defensive linemen that obviously can hold up at the point of attack, but offers a little pass rush upside. Right, we play. Although the pendulum is swinging, I do want to acknowledge that the pendulum is swinging. We're seeing more gaps, seeing more physicality. Teams running the football, playing that January style of football. But I think Harmon can hold up from that perspective, and he gives you a little juice there in terms of the pass rush. So Derek Harmon to the Vikings. And for our final selection here in the first round, I don't know if it's a smoke screen. I don't know if there's any legitimacy to the claims, but we're hearing that James Pierce may have some character concerns, this, that, and the other. I think Howie Roseman rolls the dice one way or the other. I think he rolls the dice. Perhaps he's playing with house money at this point. I actually think this is where Pierce needs to be selected in my own mind. And people may say, you're off your rocker, but the reality is that Pierce to me still needs to get stronger. I think I still need to see more consistent effort in terms of the run game. And while he has the requisite explosiveness and length that you're looking for, I just don't see the secondary and tertiary pass rush moves consistently. They're there, but they're not consistent enough for my liking. That's why he falls to the end of the first round, but he falls in a great spot. I think, if his head's on straight, he can thrive here, obviously, in Philadelphia. Okay, that takes us to day two. Day two. And lo and behold, the Cleveland Browns are on the clock once again. And I'm going to stick in terms of the trenches, but I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball and get a player that we really like at Couch Potato General Manager, Tyleek Williams. In a number of our mock drafts throughout the season, he was a first round pick. Did not look quite like the same player he did 2 seasons ago. So he drops a little bit, but I mean, here he's the first selection on day two. So really no significant drop off. Really like Tyleek Williams' game. Okay, keep him home there in the state of Ohio. D-Kids Giants back on the clock. And I'm going to get his guy. I mentioned it at the top. We traded up to get Shedeur Sanders. We need to protect Shedeur Sanders. And I think in terms of really rounding out this offensive line, a guy like Donovan Jackson, who really acquitted himself well when he played tackle, when he got his sea legs underneath him, I think he's a plug and play guy at guard. I think you can set and forget as it relates to Donovan Jackson. And that's exactly what the doctor orders here for the New York Giants. Back to back Buckeyes. The Titans on the clock. As you can see, we don't have a third round selection, right? In fact, this third round selection, I think this is something PFF needs to address unless I'm missing something, but the 101 pick actually belongs to the Detroit Lions. I believe this is the final selection in the third round. So I'm going to account for that in this mock draft. I want to add some draft capital. So let me trade down. Let me trade down here. And I have a trade partner in mind. It's the New Orleans Saints. I mentioned at the top in the first round, New Orleans has to address literally every position group at some point. It may not all happen this particular offseason, but they have needs in every position group on their roster. It really is unlike anything I've ever seen, considering how poor of a cap situation they're in as well. Just bad cap management, frankly, across the board, roster management across the board. They're going to trade up, though. They're going to trade up. There's a player in mind that I think you don't want to run the risk of missing out on, considering kind of the dearth of talent that you have on the roster and the aging talent you have on the roster, as well as expiring contracts. And the Saints trade up for Luther Burden. Now, PFF it seems steadfast in their belief of him, having ranked as the 8th player overall in the class. There's some question marks. There's some questions that he's going to have to answer, but I think he's a special player with the ball in his hands. I think there's room to grow in terms of being a better technician as far as route running is concerned. I still see his ability to stack defensive back. I think he's going to be fine. In fact, I'm fine if you decide to prioritize him in the latter parts of the first round. I don't have a problem with that. But you got Olave going in the last year of his deal, dealing with injuries. Rashid Shaheed last year of his deal, having a season-ending injury. Luther Burden makes a ton of sense here to New Orleans. Okay. Rod's Jaguars are back on the clock. And of course, we went with Mason Graham in the first round. We're going to stay on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to stay on the defensive side of the ball and the back end. The back end really disappointed this past season in Jacksonville. There's some really good corners on the board. Trey Amos, Siobhan Ravel, Azariah Thomas, Maxwell Harrison, all guys that I really like. Darian Porter, I like as well. Perhaps not as much as those first four, but Darian Porter is a player that I like as well. In this particular instance, for this team, I want the physicality and the man-to-man capabilities of Siobhan Ravel, right? I think assuming he doesn't get hurt, he's in the conversation of being, among the top 20 or so picks in this draft. Certain national analysts had him as a top corner in the entire class prior to his injury. He slides due to injury. Hopefully we get good reports coming out of Indy at the combine, but Ravel, 36 overall to Jacksonville, makes it too much sense to pass up. And now the Raiders are back on the clock. The Las Vegas Raiders. We moved up in the first to acquire Travis Hunter, kind of a two birds, one stone. He's going to play cornerback for us. Glaring need there. That's what he's going to play predominantly. As I mentioned at the top, it's just harder to find guys to hold up at the cornerback position at the NFL level, right? It's a tall order. The rules are stacked against you. Guys with that kind of athleticism, physical ability, the ability to attack the football, track the football. I think obviously having the experience as a receiver helps in terms of his preparation as a cornerback. He's going to get NFL coaching, more focused NFL coaching. I think he's going to play cornerback more routinely, right? He's not going to be splitting his time as much on both sides. So he'll be able to really hone in on the finer points of the position. But we still have that added bonus of leveraging him in packages on offense, particularly in the red zone. I think you get inside the 20, you absolutely want Travis Hunter on the field on offense. I say all that to say that we're going to trade down, though. And the team that I'm eyeing to trade up with the Raiders is the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to drop down 8 spots, add some draft capital next year as we continue to build this thing. In Indy's case, I got a player in mind. We passed on the tight end in the first round, got Malachi Starks. I think Colston Loveland is calling our name here. Then he's absolutely calling our name here. So we're going to make that trade happen. All right. So Indy moves up about 8 spots and selects Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Glaring need for this Indy team. Colston Loveland might be a better prospect just in terms of the passing game compared to Tyler Warren. I think in terms of all around, player at the position. Tyler Warren is a superior player, but just in terms of what he does in the passing game, we didn't really get to see the best of him considering the quarterback issues Michigan suffered this past season. But Loveland is definitely a player that I think a lot of folks actually believe will end up going in the first round. To get him 37th overall represents great value. Had to trade up and get him. All right, those Patriots are back on the clock. So we traded down in the first, added some additional draft capital, took Ted McMillan. I think the focus here, as I mentioned at the top, was to really outfit this roster, put it in position to support Drake May. We saw some really encouraging flashes in his rookie season, but the team is not good enough around him, and we need to address that. Ted McMillan certainly will come in, and now you have a legitimate receiver one. Once he kind of finds his way, I think you have a legitimate receiver one, and then those other guys can be complementary pieces, get moved into a role where I think they can thrive as complementary pieces. That being said, Vrabel is now the man at the controls here, and I think he's going to want to play some defense. He's going to want to affect the passer and find an edge rusher, a guy who could potentially stand up for you, a la what he did in his heyday as a member of the New England Patriots, as a player for the New England Patriots. I think at this point, we stopped the slide of Princely out of Mississippi, right? And certainly, I think with the coaching that he's going to get, that first step, quickness, explosiveness, the need the Patriots have as far as guys who can affect the pass rusher, this particular selection makes a lot of sense. Chicago has the 39th and the 41st selections. Of course, we traded down in the first round. Netted Kelvin Banks Jr. We're going to start him at guard. He's going to play guard initially, and then the assumption when Braxton Jones hits free agency, in all likelihood, is we kick Kevin Banks Jr. out to tackle. In the second round, I'm going to go on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage here, and I'm going to get Jack Sawyer. Jack Sawyer really put it together this past season, right? We've been waiting. We've been waiting for him to really live up to the 5-star billing, and at times he was completely unblockable at times, right? And frankly, he was the most consistent player on a very talented defensive line at Ohio State. So Jack Sawyer is the pick here. Fits well nicely opposite Montez Sweat. Right. Takes us to the Tennessee Titans, and of course, we stayed put with the first overall pick. Again, I think Cam Ward is deserving of it, and I think he's going to. I'm all in on Cam Ward. Obviously Hurricane fan, but watching him at Wazoo and really seeing him behind a competent offensive line, it was amazing. It was amazing. He was terrific. So what do we do? What do we do for an encore after getting our quarterback here? San Francisco's giving us a call here. Let's see what they're willing to part with. A little bit of a pick swap here in the latter parts of the third. But what we're going to do is we're going to take Deebo Samuels off the 49ers' hands. We're going to take Deebo Samuel off the 49ers' hands, add another weapon, add a player that can make plays with the ball in his hands. Of course, Deebo's coming off of a down year. He deals with injuries from time to time. They want to move that salary cap here in San Francisco, bring, Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowan, and some young guys, Juwan Jennings, obviously a mainstay. You get Brian Ayuk back. So I think San Francisco certainly can live without Deebo Samuel. And I think the Titans can absolutely use a Deebo Samuel. Now you have him and Calvin Ridley really kind of leading your passing attack. And then, of course, I like what they have in the backfield as well. All right. So what did San Francisco trade up for? For me, it's going to be Darius Alexander, right? You watch the tape and he's a man amongst boys at times and in the group of five. But then seeing him in Mobile as the playing field gets kind of leveled out, I came away thoroughly impressed. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the first round. But I think this is a sweet spot. I think he's a top 40 player, top 40, top 50 player. This is a great spot for him. San Francisco, when they were at their best, they could rush for and really wreck shop. So Darius Alexander, add Darius Alexander to the mix, and we can start trying to rebuild that formidable down four with Robert Saleh coming back to coach the defense. And I mentioned the Bears had a pair of early second-round selections. Of course, we took Jack Sawyer, 39th overall. Kelvin Banks Jr. after a trade down in the early parts of the first half of the first round. With the 41st overall pick, I'm going to get a player that I love. And I know, consensus seems to be down on him because of some issues. There were some things on tape that weren't great. There was some loafing. Come to find out, having had an opportunity to speak with him in Mobile, he was dealing with a back injury, pad level, being as tall and big as he is, 6'6", 340 pounds. That is kind of a natural challenge. But when you exacerbate that with a back injury, you can actually move a man that big, right? He's not as effective in the run game. But when Deion Walker is dialed in and he's playing with the requisite leverage, he is a first-round player. There's no doubt in my mind. There is some volatility with this pick. I'll acknowledge that. But it's not good. I'm not letting him slide any further here. Give me Deion Walker, 41st overall to the Bears. So we've added Sawyer and Walker to Montez Sweat and a bevy of rotational players as well. So I really like what we're building here in Chicago along the trenches. Okay, that takes us to the New York Jets. And Will Johnson was our first round selection. as an encore, we're gonna stay with the secondary. We're gonna stay in the secondary, and we're gonna fashion this thing in the mind of Aaron Glenn. And I love what Xavier Watts does as that center fielder, right? The ball production obviously is gaudy. It's gaudy, but he's such an intelligent football player. He's where he's supposed to be. He cleans mistakes up. He's a good enough tackler, good enough open field tackler that you don't feel like he's a liability in terms of run support. So yeah, give me Xavier Watts to really round out this secondary. Again, roster attrition. Everybody has to deal with contracts, expiring contracts, injuries, guys not performing well. I want to get back to playing really good defense here in New York. So give me Xavier Watts. Okay, we had the trade down earlier. We didn't trade down too far. We were able to net a Deebo Samuel. So the Titans selecting 43rd overall. They need some more teeth in terms of their pass rush. I like Kyle Kennard. I think Kyle Kennard is a really intriguing prospect. Transferred from Georgia Tech over to South Carolina and took over games at times. Took over games at times. I think he'd be a nice addition to this pass rush here in Tennessee. We got the Dallas Cowboys up next. We went to the offensive side of the ball, went to Ashton Jeanty again, a very popular first round selection in most mock drafts for the Dallas Cowboys. I think Dallas also has a glaring need in the secondary. Their offensive line with the Zach Martin news certainly lingers and looms big as well. This may be a good spot for that. But there's quite a few players I like in terms of interior offensive linemen that could be available a little bit later in this draft. So I'm going to go to the cornerback position, and I'm going to get another player who could force his way into the first round conversation with a really good combine showing. Trey Amos, real clean prospect, had a big season there for Ole Miss on the back end. Raiders on the clock here, and my RB2 for my money, RB2, Amari Hampton. Right, I want a legitimate guy. I can whoever's playing quarterback who could turn, give the football, and make plays, score from anywhere on the field, shorten games. When you get into that 4-minute offense, again, this is a league of one-score games. You want to be able to run the football. You want to be able to force the opposition. To burn those timeouts. Don't give them an opportunity to put their offense back on the field. Amari and Hampton will go a long way to solidifying a running back room. Keep this 3-round 2025 NFL mock draft going. The Falcons are back on the clock. I went with Mike Green in the first round. We don't have a third round selection. So our final pick in this 2025 NFL mock draft here to the Falcons, Isaiah Thomas out of Florida State. I think he and AJ Terrell could form a really nice duo. Lengthy corners, play that cover three, play that man coverage, really challenge receivers at the catch point. I think that's really what Thomas and Terrell are capable of doing. Terrell is working, become one of the better corners in this league. I'm high on Thomas's ability. I think this is a really good spot here in Atlanta for him. Got the Cardinals back on the clock, and we did manipulate the draft board a little bit, trading down, added some draft capital, so you can see a second, third round selection there. A guy who's listed as an offensive tackle, but I think he is a guard at the NFL level. Give me Wyatt Miller. Wyatt Miller had a great season, a phenomenal season playing tackle. He was one of the best in terms of pass protection, best players in the country in terms of pass protection. Really did a great job of keeping his quarterback clean. It struggled a bit in Mobile, and I think it really solidified to me what I'd already suspected was he's a guard at the next level, and of course the Cardinals have a need there as well. So Wyatt Miller is the selection. I think the Dolphins, it could double up as far as the defensive line or front seven is concerned. They certainly need to improve along the offensive line, but there's a pretty sizable hole on the back end of the defense as well at the safety position with Javon Holland. Contract expiring, his rookie contract expiring. Give me Nick Amanawari. There are going to be some NFL draft analysts that actually have Amanawari above Malachi Starks. I can't go that far, but I think he and Xavier Watts are similar in terms of ranking. I think they're different players, but similar in terms of ranking. I don't want to suggest that Amanawari is not good against the pass, though. He has ball production. He does it all. And he is physically imposing as well. And I think that's where some scouts might lean towards Amanawari over Malachi Stark. I think Malachi Stark is just a better player overall. But Amanawari is a really good player in his own right. And I think he immediately enters that starting lineup on the back end for Miami. Again, I wanted to add more physicality, more toughness to this team. And I think with the Walter Nolan and Amanawari picks certainly do that. As I mentioned, we'll keep the theme going here with the Bengals. Tyler Booker in the first. We're going to stay along the trenches, but we're going to go over to the defensive side of the ball, and we're going to pluck TJ Sanders out of the pool. Again, expiring contracts, roster attrition, right? And you got to have depth along the defensive line. The Bengals have to be careful. They have to be careful. They haven't drafted quite as well as they had in recent years, and it may be catching up to them. So if you're trying to avoid having that championship window closed, you got to push the right buttons here. So, and I think TJ Sanders certainly can help stave off, a rebuild here. We're at the 50th pick in this 3-round 2025 NFL mock draft, and Mississippi Nebraska, a guy that's kind of growing on me, and I think would be a really good fit for what they want to do out west in Seattle, is Jared Ivey. Jared Ivey is an edge by trade, but he's not super explosive, right? But his ability to play five technique and the reps, specifically the pass rush reps, when he reduces down on obvious passing down situations, are impressive. He really gives those interior offensive linemen a lot to deal with in terms of his length, and he has some good hand usage. I really like the fit here, right? There may be some players that folks like a bit more than Jared Ivey. He may get lost, in the sauce a little bit with the Walter Nolans, and then you talk about Trey Amos and Chris Paul. A lot of good defenders on that Ole Miss Rebels team, but I think this fit is terrific. Okay, we got the Tampa Bay Bucks, Drew's Bucks. We got Drew's Bucks back on the clock, and we're going to stay on the defensive side of the ball. Jahad Campbell was who we coveted, but of course, he got picked by the aforementioned Seattle Seahawks. So we traded down, actually acquired Christian Harris from the Houston Texans to play a linebacker for us, and then we added Jahdae Barron with the 25th overall pick. We're going to stay on the defensive side of the ball, and we're going to add JT out of Ohio State. He's a player I've been critical of. I've been harsh on JT, but again, not unlike Jack Sawyer, perhaps not to the level of a Jack Sawyer, but he certainly solidified his day two billing. It just kind of depends on where you see. Is he right at the turn of the first round, or is he in the middle to latter parts of day two? That's really the question mark for me. But he really helped himself this past season, especially in the playoffs, the college football playoffs, in terms of bolstering his draft stock. Okay. So we only have one more selection here for the Denver Broncos in this mock draft. We traded up, felt strongly about it, traded up to get Tyler Warren. I think that's a remarkable fit in terms of what Sean Payton can do, and of course, helping a young quarterback in Bo Nix. I mentioned it earlier. I want a running back. The question is who? Which running back? This is a really impressive class of ball carriers. In this particular instance, I think if I'm not mistaken, I've heard the Broncos being connected to Caleb Johnson. I'm okay with that one, but in this particular mock draft, I'm gonna go with Trevion Henderson. That explosiveness, that 3-down capability. What really impressed me about Henderson this year is not only what he does as a receiver, but what he does in pass pro. I was really impressed by it. And of course, Sean Payton likes to have a bit of a rotation. He's not looking for a bell cow necessarily. I think Trevion Henderson could be your lead back, but certainly you want to pair him up with somebody. I just think his skill set will work really well with what Sean Payton likes to do offensively. All right, and we're going to go right back to the running back position. The cupboard is bare. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, both of their contracts have expired. They've elapsed. Caleb Johnson, the aforementioned Caleb Johnson, comes in right away. There are folks who believe Caleb Johnson, is far and away RB2 in this class, right? And I think he's certainly a top 3-ish, top 4-ish player among the running backs, and definitely worthy of this 53rd overall selection to Pittsburgh. We're going to keep it going here with the Los Angeles Chargers. And I went with Nick Scorton in the first round. I think he's a really good fit. I think just in terms of his play style, I think it matches what the Chargers are looking for and fills a void, right? We're going to see a different looking team over the next couple of off seasons with Khalil Mack on the outs, as well as Joey Bosa. Probably his time in Los Angeles is coming to an end. That being said, I think this Chargers team needs some more firepower on the offensive side of the ball. And a guy that really has helped himself a lot throughout the 2024 season, and certainly in Mobile, is Elijah Arroyo out of Miami. Arroyo dealt with injuries through, significant parts of his collegiate career, but healthy with Cam Ward in the center, he was phenomenal. He was phenomenal. And I think he plays with a certain level of physicality and tenacity in line that while he needs to work on his technique, the want to, the drive, the frame to is there, right? And I think it's just a matter of getting him coached up because he wants to mix it up. He wants to mix it up. My big question mark with Arroyo when I went to Mobile and saw the prospects was, is he just a straight line speed guy, or does he have the requisite twitch and change of direction to really stress defenses as opposed to just being a seam threat? And he can do it all. I really don't think there's anything that Elijah Arroyo can't do in the passing game, and I think he has a lot of ability, and I think he has a requisite temperament to be a quality tight end in line as well. So Elijah Arroyo to the Chargers to bolster the Bolts offense. Next up are Jake's Green Bay Packers. It's a season of change, right? The NFL draft marks a season of change. Jair Alexander may not be long for the Green Bay Packers, right? So I think we went with Shamar Stewart. We have a need at the cornerback position. Maxwell Harrison is the next guy for me off the board among the corners. All right, we're going to keep trucking along through this 3-round 2025 NFL mock draft. We have the Buffalo Bills back on the clock, and of course went with receiver towards the end of the first round, previously taking Matthew Golden out of Texas. We're going to follow that up with addressing the defensive line, right? We got some guys that are, obviously aging. Again, every team faces roster attrition to some degree. You want to replenish that. You want to get over the hump. You got to make sure, especially after what we saw here in the Super Bowl, it just kind of reemphasized something that we've known a long time, right? You're going to be playing the better quarterbacks in the NFL as you get later into the season, deep into the playoffs. The best way to neutralize those upper echelon quarterbacks is to be able to affect the passer on a consistent basis, right? Get home with 4. When you don't have to blitz too often and you can still affect the passer, that makes all the difference. I like Landon Jackson. I like, obviously, he has a huge frame. He's a prototypical 4-3 edge. A little bit up and down in terms of his 2024 tape, but I think there's enough splashes, enough flashes within his play, and a palpable desire to get better. I think Jackson can certainly flourish with NFL coaching. I think there's another plateau. Of course, throughout the process, early in summer scouting, Jackson was a pretty popular, end of the first round selection. I don't think the tape matches up to that, but certainly here in the latter parts of the second round, I'm willing to bet on Landon Jackson's upside. The Houston Texans are up next, and I'm going to dip into this really impressive interior defensive line depth of this particular draft. Omar Norman Lott doesn't have a ton of snaps game to game, but they are all very high quality. He has that kind of natural leverage, being a bit of a shorter player, prototypical 3 tech. I think, again, in that same vein, you already have your edges in place, obviously led by Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter. You get Omar Norman Lott in that mix now, and you're gonna make it very difficult on opposing offensive lines, right? Again, we're talking about the Texans taking that next step, getting over the hump of the Baltimore Ravens, the Kansas City Chiefs, so on and so forth. They're gonna have to be able to get home with just 4. So Omar Norman Lott is the selection here to help solidify the down line in Houston. We're really focused on improving this defense in Carolina. Again, as I mentioned, historically bad. Everybody knows. Everybody's aware that they just simply need more talent on the defensive side of the ball. I like Alfred Collins. Again, going back to the interior defensive line, this particular class, the 2025 class, really has a lot of talent in that position group. Alfred Collins is not a big-time pass rusher, but he's among the best run defenders in this class. And the Panthers weren't good at stopping anything, frankly. So a guy like Collins, who has a certain pedigree, who's very physical at the point of attack, very stout at the point of attack. You get Derek Brown back. That allows our first round pick, Jalen Walker, to run and make plays, whether he's coming off the edge or playing that off ball linebacker position. I think Alfred Collins is a nice building block as we try to retool this Panthers defense. In fact, the Panthers were dead last against the run last year. So again, obviously they missed Derek Brown, but Alfred Collins goes a long way to really shoring up the run defense. You got to be able to stop something. You may not be able to take everything away, but if you can't stop the run, and at this level, if you're not able to stop the run, slow down the run, almost giving up 180 yards per game, you're not going to have success. It doesn't matter how many steps, how many leaps and bounds Bryce Young takes. It's just going to be too much to overcome at the end of the day. All right, next up we have the Baltimore Ravens. And as you can see, I went with Trey Harris in the first round. That may not necessarily be the most popular pick, but I think he is a legitimate X wideout in this class and worthy of a first round selection in this draft class. I think he's probably the last piece among the weapons, right? Or among the skill positions here in Baltimore that they need in order to get over the hump. He offers something different compared to Zay Flowers, a bigger catch radius, more physicality on the boundary. Still has the ability to actually stack defensive backs and stretch the field, but just a different type of receiver to that room compared to Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. I think the offensive line, you want to make sure that you don't let free agency and injuries ravage your offensive line. And then, of course, you got this superstar quarterback behind a porous group up front. We want to make sure that we solidify it. I think Arante Ursary is really a good player at this point in the draft. There's some technical things to flesh out, but I think the way he moves at his size and just the raw power profile that he possesses fits well with Baltimore looks for. All right, the Lions are up next on the clock. And again, I don't want to be caught in a situation where, I don't have the corresponding depth that I need in order to get over the hump, right? Detroit has been incredibly effective the last couple of seasons, certainly in the regular season. They've won playoff games. It's a matter of trying to get over the hump and making sure that as you're in this window, this championship window, this conference championship, Super Bowl window, you extend it as much as possible. So what we did in the first round, we took Mykel Williams, who I think will really help solidify the down line. I think certainly he has some work to do in terms of pass rush, but I like the idea of reducing him down next to Liam McNeil in obvious passing situations. At the second level, you went with Jack Campbell a couple drafts ago, and Saloni has been a very good player for you. But of course, I believe he's going into the last year of his respective deal. Chris Paul out of Ole Miss was kind of a heat-seeking missile for that Ole Miss defense, and really bolstered his stock this past season. Of course, he put up good numbers, transferred to Ole Miss, and really puts it all together this season. I think he possesses that 3-down skill set, and again, the physicality that you're looking for from a Dan Campbell-led football team. So Chris Paul is the pick here to Detroit. And of course, we traded our first round selection in order to acquire Myles Garrett. So that was the big splash in the first round. In the second round, I'm going to follow it up with the receiver. I think certainly Terry McLaurin with a legitimate quarterback play, you can see exactly how talented he is. Diami Brown really stepped up this season as well. Again, you can attribute some of that to having competent quarterback play. One more piece to that receiving room here. And I like Jalen Royals. I like what he does in terms of the physicality. Of course, he can make plays at every level of the defense, but he's more physical than both McLaurin and Brown. I think that added temperament to that room would be a nice fit in terms of what you already have in place. So Jalen Royals out of Utah State to the Commanders. And then, of course, we have the Bills back on the clock. And again, I'm going to go back to the defensive side of the ball. for whatever reason, the Bills haven't been able to figure out Kansas City. They simply haven't been able to figure out Kansas City. I don't think it's a talent issue. I think it's an execution. I think it's a coaching issue at this point. But because the NFL is a business, you always have about 15 to 20% at a minimum as far as roster turnover is concerned. And I think they need to continue to work on replenishing their defensive backfield. They've had some guys step up, some young players that really did a good job. But as rookie contracts expire, you got to continue to replenish this roster. I like Noah Williams out of California. Noah Williams really got on my radar considering some eye-popping INT numbers. And then you watch him play and you say, okay, with that kind of size, length, those ball skills, that will be covered. And then, of course, he goes to the Shrine game and you get to see more of his man-to-man coverage ability and the confidence that he plays with. I think he's certainly going to be pushing into, that second, third round turn as it relates to the 2025 NFL draft. So good spot here, landing in Buffalo. Speaking of the Chiefs, speaking of Kansas City, like every other organization, has to ensure that they continue to elongate their Super Bowl window. And of course, with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid in place, as well as Spags, I don't understand why anybody hasn't come and grabbed Spags out of Kansas City. I think that window will remain open, but Nick Bolton's contract has expired. I think it would behoove Kansas City to re-up with Bolton, maybe franchise tag him. But if, in the event, he moves on, I think Carson Schlesinger and Leo Chenal could form a pretty dynamic duo at the second level of defense. Schlesinger is a player that I really like as a weak side linebacker. Chenal can move in from the strong side, play the Mike position if Bolton moves on, and then Schlesinger can just run sideline to sideline. He's terrific in coverage. I think Spags will do a good job of getting him in position to blitz the quarterback. He closes quickly. While he doesn't necessarily have the same level of physicality of a Nick Bolton, I think certainly his athleticism would be a welcome addition in the Kansas City Chiefs defense. Okay, last pick here in the second round of this 3-round 2025 NFL mock draft. And James Pierce falls to us in the first, right? As we kind of replenish and make sure we have that stockpile of pass rushers, which is, Howie Roseman has done a terrific job of just ensuring that you have that nice blend of young and veteran player. Obviously, you're going to have some more roster changes with, another Super Bowl run. Brandon Graham, I imagine, will be retiring. You know what I mean? So while certain guys will step up, you want to make sure you have that next line, that next wave of pass rushers in place. So James Pierce in the first round. In the second round, I'm going to take that same mentality of just ensuring that that roster stays loaded, right? That we have really impressive depth. And in fact, I think this player is going to be a big-time draft riser coming out of the pre-draft process and may eventually be the starter. I think he could replace Mekhi Becton at guard. Give me Miles Frazier out of LSU. The focus is always on Will Campbell and Emory Jones. And Emory Jones struggled this year. He struggled this year, and I don't think he had a particularly good showing there in Mobile as well. So his arrow is pointing down as far as his draft stock is concerned. Miles Frazier, on the other hand, the guy that kind of gets lost in the conversation between those two tackles, is the guy who's ascending. And they actually played him a little bit at tackle in Mobile, and he looked just fine. Terrific pass protector, plays with the requisite nastiness and physicality to be effective in the run game as well. Frazier gave up one QB hit all season. Go and watch that Ole Miss tape where he had a number of individual matchups with Walter Nolan. See how Miles Frazier fared in that particular game. I would argue that among that trio of LSU linemen that are in this particular class, Frazier fared the best in that matchup. So give me Miles Frazier. I think, of course, he can drop in the guard, but he's talented enough to play tackle as well. So, long term, what happens with Lane Johnson, Miles Frazier might be part of the solution there. But definitely, I think he could slide in immediately for Mekhi Becton. That takes us to the beginning of the third and final round in this 2025 NFL mock draft. The Browns, once again, getting us kicked off here. And what have we done to this point? We've gone with Abdul Carter, Gray Zabel, Tyleek Williams. Again, the trade that netted Zabel actually sent Myles Garrett to the Commanders. Really good start here in terms of really replenishing, getting younger along both sides of the line of scrimmage here with Carter, Zabel, and Tyleek Williams. I'm going to go to the back end of the defense. Andrew Makuba had a terrific season, the transfer from Clemson, going over to Texas. The question marks that we had about Makuba here at Confrontational General Manager was the physicality, was the physical aspects of the game. We always thought that, he was very good in coverage, in space, but he really demonstrated the willingness, the ability to consistently come up and play with a certain level of physicality. So I think Makuba will be a nice addition to the back end here as Juan Thornhill enters the final year of his deal. That's Makuba to the Browns. Another pick coming up for the Browns here shortly. We have the Minnesota Vikings up on the clock, and to this point, a trade down in the first round netted Derek Harmon, who was really, if you look at just from a statistical standpoint, he was the best pass rusher this past season among interior defensive linemen. I really love his game. Really talented player. I think I was a little bit later to the party on Derek Harmon, but as I watch his film and really get a feel for what he's capable of doing, I'm excited about what he can do for this Vikings team or any team in the need of an interior defensive lineman who can hold up both in the run and get after the passer. Pair of third-round picks here for the Vikings, and with the first one, I'm going to go get his teammate. I'm going to get his teammate Jabbar Muhammad at cornerback. You can see PFF is really low on Jabbar Muhammad, and I cannot explain why. I think certainly if Muhammad comes out last year after his showing in the college football playoffs and throughout the season for Washington prior to the transfer to Oregon, he's at a minimum getting picked in the second round. I know there may be some concerns about his size, but Jabbar Muhammad was among Oregon's best defenders. And again, I'm not sure exactly why he's sliding down the board. We're going to make it stop here, though. Early third round is as far as it goes in terms of Jabbar Muhammad sliding down this draft board. And again, of course, that's a need for the Vikings. You want to make sure you have plenty of competent defensive backs on the back end, especially when you're as aggressive as Brian Flores is. As I mentioned, Cleveland right back on the board here. I'm actually going to add a back. Again, this is a draft class where if you need a running back, even if you don't need a running back, you might want to pick one up at some point in this draft. It's a really deep, talented class of ball carriers here. Previously, I kept Tyleik Williams home in the state of Ohio. I'm going to go back to the Ohio State Buckeyes here, and I'm going to pick Quinshon Judkins. I'm a fan. I've always been a fan of Jerome Ford. I think certainly he will be in the mix in the 2025 season, but he's entering the final year of his deal. Nick Chubb, the injuries have kind of caught up to Chubb. Certainly, I hope that he can kind of get back to form. But he's an older back at this point. Has had some significant knee injuries. His contract has expired. It's time to add a young ball carrier to the mix here in Cleveland. So Quinshon Judkins is the pick. All right, I got back-to-back selections here for the New England Patriots. This is courtesy of the Las Vegas Raiders. Of course, we traded down in the first round, came away with Ted McMillan, took Princely, the edge out of Mississippi, in the second round for Mike Vrabel to really bolster this pass rush. We're going to go back to the offensive side of the ball. And again, I mentioned at the very top of this mock draft, we want to create an environment that is conducive to the success of our young quarterback here, Drake May. So there's a pair of offensive linemen that I want. I think at least one will start year one, and there's a potential of both of these young players being able to crack the starting lineup here. Give me Anthony Belton to slide in at tackle. I'm going to play him at left tackle. Really like Belton's tape. He's a guy that is growing on me throughout the pre-draft process. And then that allows me to move the incumbent back to right tackle. And with the 69th overall pick, I'm going to add that guard. I'm going to add the player that I believe is a better guard than tackle prospect. That's Marcus Bowe out of Purdue. Marcus Bowe has certainly helped his draft stock throughout the 2024 season. A little up and down in Mobile, but I think that position flexibility is going to be coveted by a number of NFL teams. So Belton and Bowe back to back, got a good look at them in Mobile, and I feel comfortable selecting them and them being part of the long-term solution along the offensive line here in New England. Okay, we're going to keep it going as far as the offensive line is concerned here. Mason Graham, Trevon Revell in the first two rounds to Jacksonville, really trying to bolster that defense that struggled mightily last year. But we also have to keep our quarterback upright. And another tackle prospect I think needs to be moved inside to guard and could thrive at the guard position is Jonah out of Arizona. And I'm deliberately skipping the pronunciation of his last name, unfortunately, because I haven't gotten the phonetics just down yet. But he's played tackle predominantly at Arizona, but I've always viewed him as a guard. And again, seeing him up close and personal in Mobile, his best snaps came when he was moved to the inside. Fairly obvious need, no more Brandon Scherf. So through the first two rounds, we've netted Will Campbell and Luther Burden for the New Orleans Saints. I think guys obviously going to come in and contribute immediately. Burden comes at a little bit of a discount in the second round, in the early parts of the second round. So I really like that selection on top of the Will Campbell pick. The next guy I have in mind actually plays a position where young players generally do not make an immediate impact. But with the likes of Taysom Hill, going to be a cap casualty. Juwan Johnson, his contract has expired. Foster Moreau is in the last year of his deal. This is a good class for tight ends. And I think Mason Taylor, a local guy here from LSU, would be an excellent fit in New Orleans as we're trying to build this thing for the future, right? I don't expect New Orleans to be particularly competitive, but I think with some shrewd selections over the next couple of drafts and getting that cap situation under control, they'll be ready to go in relatively short order. We got the Chicago Bears on the clock, and there's some receivers that are sliding a little bit here. There's a lot of good names here that I think the third round is going to be the sweet spot for several receivers. One particularly needy team, although the Bears could use a receiver in their own right, really to kind of round out both DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. The Dallas Cowboys have a pretty significant need at the wide receiver position as well. So we're going to make a trade here between the Bears and the Cowboys. The Bears will drop down 4 spots, but we're going to pick up a fifth round selection in 2026. All right. So who did the Dallas Cowboys trade up for? Jack Bech. Jack Bech was really impressive in Mobile, and you go back and you check the tape, and it's like, oh, okay. This should not have surprised you the way he performed at Mobile. I think Tez Johnson probably is the only other receiver that had as much success as Jack Bech, and Bech did it in 1-on-1, 7-on-7, 11-on-11, and in the game, had the game-winning score. This is a guy that, just recently someone posted on X that Bech, as a true freshman, led the LSU Tigers in receiving. And this is a team that had Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. on it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, the guy can play. The guy can play. And frankly, he may have forced his way into the second round. But in this mock draft, we're going to take him 72nd overall to the Dallas Cowboys, trading up, get a guy to remain in the state of Texas. Las Vegas Raiders are back on the clock. And I'm not certain. I'm not certain what the plan is. I do believe the Raiders will ultimately acquire a veteran, whether it be Sam Darnold, Kirk Cousins, perhaps Justin Fields. But in this mock draft, I'm going to add a QB. I'm I'm going to add a QB. We haven't had any quarterbacks come off the board since the first two selections. Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart currently holds the third spot. It's a bit of a debate for me between he and Will Howard. Jalen Milroe actually held that spot for the lion's share of the season, but I just think he's so far away from being ready. Now, this might be a team. I think this might be a team that's willing to roll the dice on him because there is some really intriguing tools with Jalen Milroe, right? And if you do have that veteran in place, you can potentially wait on him. How long are you planning on waiting? You got an older coach in Pete Carroll. What's the thought process here? This may be a good landing spot for Milroe, assuming they get one of those veterans, whether it be a Darnold or Cousins. I think if Justin Fields is a guy, in my mind, you roll with Justin Fields. That's kind of my mind. But if I do bring in a Darnold, it's particularly a Kirk Cousins, you definitely need to have a kind of a succession plan in place. And I think Jackson Dart fits the bill for me currently. We've placed an emphasis here on defense for the Carolina Panthers with Jalen Walker and then Alfred Collins to really sure things up front, pave the way for Jalen Walker to make plays from his edge rushing or off-ball linebacker position, wherever you deploy him on any given snap. I want to roll the dice a little bit here. This may not necessarily be the approach that the Panthers fans will take because you have to ask yourself. You have to ask yourself, are we ready to win? Are we ready to compete? Right? And just trading for a veteran makes sense for a team like Carolina. I think in this particular instance, if you can stomach the potential for injury with this particular player, I think you make this deal. I think you absolutely make the deal. If it costs you a third round pick to acquire the likes of perhaps like a Jair Alexander, for example, we think will be on the move here, I think it's absolutely worth it. Yeah, I think if you can get Alexander at a little bit of a discount here because he's only played 14 games over the last two seasons, but when Alexander's healthy, to me he's a top 10 corner in this league. Top 10 corner in this league. At this point, and he's had a couple seasons where he's been a top 5 guy in my mind. The Marshawn Lattimore trade, right? In season when the Commanders acquired Lattimore, they gave a third, a fourth, and future 6th round selections. If we could pry Alexander away from Green Bay just for a third, I think it's worth the risk, right? And you just think about it again. There's some volatility. We're getting it at a bit of a discount because of the injury history. J.C. Horn has dealt with some injuries, but just imagine having J.C. Horn and Jair Alexander manning your corner positions moving forward. That really, to me, goes a long way in making this defense legitimate. Our first and second round selections of Jalen Walker and Alfred Collins certainly helps up front make the lives of a J.C. Horn and a Jair Alexander easier. But Alexander and Horn, clearly excellent players in their own right. They just got to stay healthy. All right, so with Green Bay trading up, understanding that we have multiple starters, 3 starters along this offensive line that are entering the last year of their rookie deals. The entire right side of your line with Sean Ryan and Zach Tom. Zach Tom, I fully expect to be back. Shedeur Walker has certainly outperformed his draft position at left tackle, but again, he may be looking to cash in, right? I think a player, again, not unlike the selection we made earlier with Shamar Stewart, right? Betting on traits, betting on those physical attributes and really challenging your coaches to get the most out of certain players that have flashed really high-end ability, but maybe not necessarily the most consistent or played upper echelon talent. And that's the case here with Charles Grant out of William & Mary. I think Charles Grant absolutely has the desired skill set, right? He is high-end clay. He's just, it's a significant step up to the next level. So he's going to need the coaching, but I think this is the type of player that Green Bay just simply enjoys identifying. You can't teach the physical tools he has, the way he moves, the way he dominated at a lower level of competition. So Charles Grant is the pick here, and I think he's going to be a long-term solution at left tackle for us. Okay, so San Francisco to this point has been all meat and potatoes. All meat and potatoes. I mentioned it at the beginning of this mock draft that if San Francisco wants to remain in a competitive window, they're going to have to retool both offensive line and defensive line. So Josh Simmons in the first, Darius Alexander in the second. In the third round, I'm going back to the offensive line and Cameron Williams, who struggled. I think there were some peaks in his play, but entirely too many valleys in his play as an inexperienced tackle. Simply his athleticism, the way he moves, he's a perfect fit for this zone blocking scheme. We kick him inside. Now, Pooney and Williams are our guards, and I love what we're building now long term along this offensive line. So while Cameron Williams was getting some late first round, early day 2 buzz, I think the third round and moving him to the interior of the offensive line is really the sweet spot for him. All right, so we traded down a few picks ago here at the Bears. We're going to take that receiver. I mentioned it. I want a player to come in and be that third option between DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. Of course, you have Cole Kmet, so another receiving option. So, but I think Tez Johnson, again, understanding that he is severely underweight, right? He is definitely an outlier. But the way he plays, his football IQ, his ability to consistently separate, I think he will thrive in this offense. I think he can absolutely thrive in this offense. New actually accomplished play caller at the head coach now here in Chicago. I think his wheels up. I think his wheels up. Based on what we've done thus far, Kelvin Banks to help solidify the interior of that offensive line, he could be our long-term answer at left tackle, assuming Braxton Jones moves on. Jack Sawyer, Deion Walker really rounds out that defensive line. Now we add Tez Johnson to the offense, and I think we're in good shape, man. Maybe a back a little bit later to really solidify things, but really like this pick here, considering what's already on the roster. So we just made a selection of Jackson Dart a few picks ago. We're back on the clock here with the Vegas Raiders. And while I do think there's a role for Travis Hunter on this offense, particularly in the red zone, I want him focusing primarily on playing cornerback, right? I've said it before. I'll continue to reemphasize it. I just think it's more difficult to find guys who are really good at playing the cornerback position. I think it's easier to find receivers. And this mock draft is going to show that because a guy like Jaden Higgins has put up a ton of production out at Iowa State. He and his teammate Jalen Noel. And I think he comes in along with Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, and again, having Travis Hunter moonlight on offense. I think we now have some really good and intriguing pieces. I mentioned it previously. Omarion Hampton. Now we're developing some legitimacy on the offensive side of the ball, as opposed to Brock Bowers or bust effectively. All right. What have we done with Arizona thus far? We went to the trenches. Kenneth Grant, Wyatt Millam, who I want to kick into the interior of the offensive line. I'm going to go back to the defensive side of the ball. Get a pass rusher. Add another pass rusher. You can never have too many of them. Josiah Stewart out of Michigan. I think he fits the bill as far as being an edge rusher. Put him in that rotation with the likes of BJ Ojulari, who's coming off an injury, Zavin Collins, Xavier Thomas, a player that we kind of liked in the latter parts of the draft last year. Stewart is actually a really good athlete. He's a really good athlete. I think obviously he's known for what he does as a pass rusher, but the way he plays in space is impressive as well. So I like the fit here of Josiah Stewart to the Cardinals. All right, the Commanders back on the clock. A sense of wanting to improve the running back position here in Washington, right? Brian Robinson entering the last year of his deal. Austin Eckler is 30 years old, 1 year remaining on his deal. This is a draft class, a 2025 draft class, where if you need a running back, or even if you don't necessarily need one, you might want to select one at some point anyway. And a guy I really like, he's a top 5 back for me, Damian Martinez. People will say there's homerism, but Martinez's skill set, man, is impressive. Physicality, running behind his shoulder pads, yards after contact at Oregon State. It was the soft hands out of the backfield and the long speed in the open field that I saw at Miami. So I'm really encouraged and think he's a great addition at this point for the Washington Commanders. And just to reemphasize, Jalen Royals in the second, Martinez now here in the third. In the first round, we used that first round selection to trade for and acquire Myles Garrett. Indy back on the clock, and we've been trying to figure out this pass rush, right? Especially on the edges, Kwity Paye and some veterans and so on and so forth. Of course, we went Latu, who I love last year, needs to work on his functional strength, but I think year 2 is going to be a big year for him. I want to get a guy opposite of him, and Donovan Ezeraku fits the bill as far as this 4-3 edge. I think he can stand up playing a 2-point stance as well, but I want him to put his hand in the ground, and I think he can be very effective opposite of Latu. So Ezeraku is a selection here to Indy at 80th overall. Of a meat and potatoes draft for the Bengals, which makes sense considering what their current roster looks like. There's also a need at the tight end position. I talked about the depth at the running back position in this draft class. I think the tight end position is also really deep. I think Harold Fan has been on the board too long, man. Big time pass catching threat. The likelihood that T. Higgins move again, I'm going to foreshadow a little bit here in this mock draft. I'm not sure that T. Higgins will be with the Bengals long term. I know that they're going to tag him, but I would imagine that they trade him at the end of the day. Now, with the salary cap increasing, might be a different story, but you got to get a long-term deal done with Jamar Chase as well. So re-upping with Chase and locking in Trey Hendrickson, I think are bigger priorities than signing Higgins long-term. So we're going to actually add some teeth to this passing game here with Harold Fanta Jr. And there's been a lot made about his inability to block. I think that's been overstated. I think there's certainly room for improvement. I don't think he's going to be dominant in line, but he's a willing blocker. He's absolutely a willing blocker. I think a little bit more refinement and coaching will get him to a point where he's solid in terms of run blocking as an inline threat. But you want to flex him out. You want to move him around the formation. You want him in the H-back. You want to get his hands on the football. I think he could be a dynamic threat in an offense led by Burrow and flanked by the likes of Jamar Chase. All right, Mr. Prasky, it's time. Let's go get your interior offensive lineman. Right now, for me, the best name available is Tate Ratledge. The Seahawks could very well have 2 interior offensive line positions up for grabs. I still believe in Christian Haynes. I know Mr. Prasky is out on him. I believe in Christian Haynes. I think he'll nab one of those positions, but competition is a good thing. Let's get Tate Ratledge out of Georgia as well. All right, so the Bucks are on the clock. We went with the corner. We've taken an edge to this point. I actually want to go back to edge defensive line here. And the reason why is because there's a lot of roster attrition here. You got Anthony Nelson, his contract's up. Ghost's contract's up. Greg Gaines' contract is expired. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka's contract is expired. A lot of roster attrition here, so we're going to double up. We're going to double dip. And I know a guy that Drew likes, actually consulted Drew on the selection. Give me David Walker out of Central Arkansas, man. Ball of fire off the edge. All right, back on the clock with Dana's Cardinals. To this point, Kenneth Grant, Wyatt Miller went back to Michigan with Josiah Stewart. I want to add a receiver. I want to add a receiver to the mix here. A different type of receiver, a guy who's really grown on me throughout the pre-draft process. Jalen Noel. Jalen Noel out of Iowa State. I think he can come in and really claim that slot role. He can play outside the numbers. The route running. The route running is really effective. He can stack defensive backs. Very polished receiver. Very, very, very polished receiver. A lot of production there out of Iowa State. Pittsburgh on the clock went Benjamin Morrison, Caleb Johnson in the first 2 rounds. Let's get a quarterback. I mentioned, in when I selected Jackson Dart for the Raiders, Will Howard was certainly in the conversation. I think now's the time for Will Howard to come off the board. Again, I expect this team to engage a veteran, but want to come away with a young quarterback as well, unless it's Justin Fields. Again, I'm a guy who says, you know what, I'm willing to invest in Justin Fields. I'm willing to invest in Justin Fields and give him every opportunity, especially behind what I expect will be a really good offensive line here in Pittsburgh. That's the direction I would go in. But if you don't go with Justin Fields here, I'd like to add a Will Howard type. All right, the Chargers are on the clock, and Nick Scorton, Elijah Arroyo through the first 2 rounds thus far. Let's add it back. Let's add it back. I know they want to run the football. They want to play action to Arroyo, to Lad McConkey and Quentin Johnston. Let's get it back. Let's get it back. Who's going to actually force those safeties, that extra defender into the box? Watching Cam Scatterboot, you could see, gaudy numbers. Then you actually watch him, and he's got incredibly nimble feet. Really, really good contact balance, but incredibly nimble feet. I was not expecting. I was expecting the power. I was expecting, fairly decent top end speed. The inherent junk cuts, and the light feet really gets me excited about what Scatterboot can be at the next level. Okay, so we traded up earlier in the 3rd round. Traded away, as a matter of fact, Jair Alexander, sent him to Carolina, and we took Charles Grant. Of course, prior to that, Maxwell Harrison and Shamar Stewart. I'm actually going to trade away this 3rd-round pick here. It's 87th overall pick, Green Bay's actual 3rd-round pick. I've alluded to it a couple of times now throughout this mock draft. We're going to call Cincinnati. The Green Bay Packers are in need of a true number one out wide. A true number one. I like the collection of young players they've had in the position, but with Watson struggling to stay healthy and really developing into a true number one, some of the other young guys, again, very talented core, but just lacking the consistency and just being that alpha in the room. I think Green Bay, a team that's right there on the cusp, needs to consider really pushing their chips to the middle of the table here. And if Higgins is available, you got to put in the call. All right, so to consummate this trade, to pry T. Higgins away from the Cincinnati Bengals, we're going to give up the 87th overall pick. The Bengals don't have a 7th round selection here in 2025, so we'll part with the 238, and then a 3rd round on top of that in 2026. And then just for good measure, Dontavian Wicks, who's a young player, a couple of years left on his rookie deal to kind of sweeten the pot here for the Cincinnati Bengals. And Green Bay gets their number one. They get their number one. You still have, obviously, Jayden Reed, who I like a great deal. I thought Jayden Reed could actually develop into the number one. I like him a great deal, but I think in more of a secondary pass option role, he will thrive. And then Romeo Doubs is still in the wings as well. Day 3, Green Bay could go back to the well as far as receiver is concerned. I'm interested to hear Green Bay fans' thoughts in terms of whether or not this package is enough or the Bengals feel like it's too light in terms of what you're getting in return. But I do think this works for both teams, all things considered, considering some of the cap constraints potentially that the Bengals have as they're trying to round out everything else. And, of course, get Jamar Chase signed to a long-term deal. I think this is reasonable return, all things considered. So now the Bengals hold the 87th overall selection, and I'm going to add to that defense. So Booker, Sanders, Fannin through the first 3 picks. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball, and I will grab Darian Porter out of Iowa State. Porter's a good corner in his own right, but what he does in terms of special teams as well, he's a core special teamer as well. I think his all-around skill set, he's just a good football player. I think that's the best way to put it. He's a good football player. Maybe won't develop into an elite cornerback, but I think he's going to be a good one throughout his career. And then, of course, like I said, the added benefit of him being a core special teamer, I think is a good use of this 3rd-round selection right now. There's going to be some changes on the back end here in Cincinnati. Contracts expiring, guys underperforming. Porter may not necessarily crack the starting lineup in great detail. He may be more of a sub-package guy initially, but what he does as a core special teamer in 2025 will get people excited, and I think he definitely enters the starting lineup in 2026. So I like Darian Porter, what he can add to the Bengals defense here, 87th overall. Jacksonville back on the clock. Let's take a look at what we've done thus far. Mason Graham, Siobhan Ravel, grabbed an interior offensive lineman out of Arizona. To wrap up things for the Jaguars in this 3-round mock draft, I'm going to go back to the secondary. A guy who has kind of been lost in translation. He got hurt, and as a result, he just kind of out of sight, out of mind. But the tape was really impressive. Before Nick Emmanwori really started to climb and Makuba really rehabilitate his draft stock, the guy was Kevin Winston Jr., man. Kevin Winston Jr. was kind of the guy that we talked about at a high level, you know what I'm saying, glowingly after Malachi Starks. Like, who was going to be that next guy? Kevin Winston was in that position prior to the injury. I'm expecting him to be healthy, and getting him 88th overall is actually a value. All right, we saw the struggles that the Texans had as far as keeping CJ Stroud upright when they played some of the upper echelon teams. There's another tackle by trade, but played a ton of guard. Even in games from snap or series to series, he'd be bouncing back and forth between tackle and guard. I think if you put Jalen Rivers at guard, let him continue to work out the finer points of it, I think he'll be terrific. I think Jalen Rivers will be a long-term mainstay at guard for you. In a pinch, you got injury situation, you can kick him out the tackle, but I think his home definitely is guard at the NFL level. 90th pick overall. The Rams are on the clock. And actually, the Rams have a pair of third-round picks here later in the draft. Armand Membo in the first round. Corner. You know, I love how the Rams have drafted young players. They're getting these guys, day 2, day 3 a lot of the times. Want to add pieces to a secondary that may have overachieved a little bit, considering the pedigree or lack thereof of some of their players. But certainly, well-coached group. I think adding a Quincy Riley to that mix, he fits in perfectly. That same kind of overachiever to a certain degree. I think you could see Riley come off the board earlier than this, frankly, in the 2025 NFL draft. But he fits in well in terms of what the Rams need on the back end. We did the thing in the first round here with the Baltimore Ravens, got Trey Harris. We want to make sure we keep Lamar upright with cursory in the second round. Now we're going to address the defensive side of the ball. And there's a player that is climbing up boards. And I just wonder how far he's going to climb if he really puts on a show at the combine. And that is LSU edge defender Braden Swinson. You can see PFF is a bit lower on him, but some eye-popping pass rush numbers, right? Advanced stats, and then healthy number of run stops as well. We're talking about over 30 run stops as well. So when Harold Perkins went down, I think Swinson really stepped up. Savion Jones is another player that I like quite a bit on that LSU defense, but Braden Swinson's ceiling is seemingly immense. So I like him. Probably won't have to play a ton of snaps early on. You can just kind of leverage him in sub packages, but get him acclimated to the rigors of the NFL. And I think year 2, he could really step up. You don't know what's going to happen here long term with Adolfo Owe. He's gotten better over the years, but does he warrant the big time deal at this point? Kyle Van Noy was a godsend for the Ravens pass rush, but an older player in his own right. I do think you need to get prepared for life after those players in the event they don't re-up with Owe. All right. So for the Jets, we've really fashioned this thing in the light of Aaron Glenn. There's a lot of work to be done here. There's a lot of work to be done here. One of the things I've mentioned is that I really like the depth of this draft class along the defensive line, and the Jets have some needs there. We could go in that direction, but I'm gonna grab another quarterback. I really like what I saw from Kyle McCord this past year at Syracuse. He's got the arm talent. There's no question about it. I imagine they'll bring in a veteran, but at this point in the draft, third round is kind of the sweet spot for me for the Jackson Darts, Will Howards, Kyle McCord, even Jalen Milroe. Although I'm concerned that he has a longer wait in terms of being able to get on the field and play the position at a high enough level to be effective. So I'll go with Kyle McCord here to the Jets. Keep him in the state of New York. San Francisco's up next, and it's been all meat and potatoes, and I'm not changing it. I can't emphasize it enough. I think in terms of skill positions, they're in pretty decent shape on the offensive side of the ball. I think San Francisco just has struggled to stay healthy, and effectiveness and expiring contracts have kind of ravaged what they've had along the defensive line, which was an excellent starting group and a pretty solid rotation. I want to rebuild that. And I think Ashton Gelati out of Louisville is a guy that I really like. He's kind of gotten lost as other players along the defensive line have made waves and improved their draft stocks. But he's a 4-3 edge by trade, but his reps inside. Obvious passing down situations, when he moves into the interior of the defensive line, he's phenomenal. So now you have him, you have Nick Bosa. We've added Darius Alexander, who's a handful in his own right. Now I like what we're doing here on either side of the line of scrimmage in San Francisco. Getting back to brass tacks here. Okay, D-Kit. Final selection here for your New York Giants. And another player that I'm probably higher on than the consensus at the cornerback position, Odamo Fortune. I'm just not sure why folks don't talk about him more. Maybe because he played on a defense that had a lot of great talent, but he was one of the more consistent players at the cornerback position this year. If you're looking for a guy who does it all, right? Zone coverage, man coverage, Fortune checks the box, man. He absolutely checks the box. He can play outside on the boundary. I really like this player. And I think as we get closer to the draft, we should see him rise in rankings. What we've done for the Kansas City Chiefs thus far is Josh Connolly after a trade up in the first round. Carson Schlesinger, again, the thought process here is that we're going to kick Leo Chenal to the mic, move Schlesinger weak side with Nick Bolton potentially hitting free agency, cashing in big. He's a hell of a player in his own right. The defensive line, again, contracts, guys cashing in, expiring contracts. Kansas City wants to have a certain level of depth and a rotation up front. And the interior of the defensive line is really where they're hurting. I think they're fine at edge. A guy like JJ Pegues, and if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, please give me the phonetics. I really think he's an excellent fit for what they need up front. The physicality, he does flash the ability to push the pocket a little bit as well, but just really stout at the point of attack. Allow Christian Jones and Karl Loftus to do their thing up front. Pegues is a player that I think it would look really good in a Kansas City Chiefs uniform. JJ. Pegues. I'm not sure if it's Pegues or Pegues. I haven't heard the pronunciation in quite some time. So Again, down in the comment section, let me know what the phonetics look like on that one. All right, just a handful more picks here, and I will speak into existence the 101 pick because I do believe the third round ends at 101, and that pick should be owned by the Detroit Lions. The Philadelphia Eagles back on the clock. Pierce Frazier to this point. I think the Eagles have a lot of flexibility here. They could go in a number of different directions. Zach Bond's contract has expired. Of course, you have N'Kobe Dean, who, when healthy, has really come into his own. I like Jeremiah Trotter a lot, but injuries, injuries to Dean, health is a little bit of a concern. I'm going to add a player to the second level of the defense here, and again, perhaps a player that we're a little higher on here at Couch Potato General Manager versus the consensus. Jay Higgins. Jay Higgins, one of the few linebackers that actually stacks in sheds. But what I really came away impressed by was, I'm thinking as my guys were kind of describing him to me, a two down thumper. No, he's a three down player. He actually plays very well in pass coverage. Gets into the passing lane, whether it be man or zone. Gets into those passing lane, gets his hands up, gets his hands on the football, always around the football, tackling machine. So I like Jay Higgins here to Philadelphia. Okay, for the Vikings, we doubled up with Oregon prospects here, Derek Harmon and Jabbar Muhammad for the 97th overall pick. We're going to get it back. We're going to get it back. There really is nothing in the cupboard. The cupboard is bare at running back, and there's so many good guys. I mean, it just kind of depends on what you like. I think Devin Neal would be a really good fit. Dylan Sampson certainly could be the solution. In this particular match, I'm going to go with R.J. Harvey. I think R.J. Harvey kind of gives you the best of both worlds between Dylan Sampson and Devin Neal. So give me R.J. Harvey here in Minnesota. Okay, a few more selections here. Chicago back on the clock. And all the safeties, Kevin Byard, Jaquan Brisker, who's been dealing with a concussion. I'm not sure how he's faring. And Owens, all the safeties are in the final years of their deal. So I want to think a little bit about the future here. A player that I really like is Billy Bowman. Obviously, he's always where he's supposed to be. Physical, gets his hands on the football. Just a really cerebral and physical player, right? And that's what you're kind of looking for at the safety position. You know what I mean? So give me Billy Bowman to really prepare ourselves long term at the safety position. Okay. Cam Ward, first overall, we followed that up in the second round after a trade down with Kyle Kennard. That trade down netted us Deebo Samuel as well. So we were able to add Deebo's skill set to this offense. I want to go back to the offense. And for me, it's coming down to two former teammates of Cam Ward, Xavier Restrepo or Kyle Williams. And I'm going to go with Kyle Williams, a guy that I think, again, is one of those guys that I think when it's all said and done will be going up certainly higher than 153rd in my mind, right? 2 years ago, he and Cam Ward had a nice combination. Wasn't quite as prolific as the Xavier Restrepo and Cam Ward combination, but Kyle Williams really put it together this past year, right? And why I'm giving him the edge is because Kyle Williams can do it both inside and outside the numbers. Restrepo is strictly a slot. I think Kyle Williams gives you a little bit more flexibility, all right? So technically, the final pick in this 2025 three-round NFL mock draft will be the aforementioned Xavier Restrepo. So, of course, we traded away Cooper Kupp early, of course. Puka Nacua becomes the mainstay, right? He's the focal point of the passing offense. A guy like Xavier Restrepo, his spatial awareness, his feel for the game, whether it be, between the 20s, inside the 20, whatever the case may be, I think he would fit in well in terms of what Sean McVay wants to do offensively. And as I mentioned before, Detroit actually holds the 101st overall pick. I think PFF just has to get their mock draft order situated, unless I'm making a mistake. But I take Isaiah Bond. I think the Lions have a need for a tertiary option at the wideout position. I know Khalif Raymond is nice, in spots, but I don't know if I want to thrust him into all of my three receivers sets. I'd like to have a little bit of depth there. So give me Isaiah Bond to the Detroit Lions. With that said, I am going to log off. Guys, thanks for rocking with me. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button. Let me know what you think in the comments. What would you have done a little bit differently? Who should be prioritized? I'm always interested to hear folks' thoughts. I'm going to scroll through this mock draft. So, again, be sure to hit that like button. If you enjoyed the content, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.